Well, if it wasn't over on Saturday, the title race is certainly over now. Liverpool beat Newcastle whilst Arsenal drop another 2 points at Nottingham Forest. With me to break it all down is the brilliant Mike Stavrou. Mike, welcome back to the pod. How are you, mate? Happy Thursday.
Thank you, mate. I wish it was in better circumstances. But yeah, I was saying to you before we jumped on here today, it was like because I've sort of accepted. I think ever since I messaged you last night, ever since the Havertz injury, and that was the day of the Liverpool game, the Liverpool Everton game, I think, and that kind of day it was sort of solidified. So I think now I'm just kind of I've stripped back the emotion a bit. I've kind of accepted our fate, and it allowed me to look at it, I guess, a bit more objectively. I hope so. Yeah, not ideal, but it is what it is now, isn't it? We've got to accept that the Premier League's gone. We've got the Champions League still, so we've got to put all our eggs in that basket, really.
Yeah, we do indeed. Look, I do want to add a sort of precursor to this episode, and what I want to say is to go away to the team that are third in the Premier League and draw is not the be all and end all. It's not a disaster result. I don't even think the performance in terms of like 2/3 of the way through the pitch was bad. I thought defensively we were quite good. I thought in the midfield we were quite good. But obviously we're going to come on to talk about the lack of a punch in attack, which has obviously been a common theme for us recently and something that's causing huge concern. But I just want to make the point that before it sounds like I am sitting here and ripping this team and some of the decisions that the managers made to shreds, I do appreciate that going away to a side that are third in the Premier League and deserve their flowers and deserve their respect for what they've managed this season and ultimately escaping there with a point. It's not a disaster, okay? It's not what we needed. And, you know, in the context of the title race, it can be seen as a much worse result, of course. But in the grand scheme of things, if you're going to have a meltdown, I don't think this was the game to do it after. I feel like this is a game that really highlighted what our issues are currently, and we can explain those and we can break those down. But if you want to have a bit of a head loss, I would say that the head loss probably should have come on Saturday rather than after this one. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it would be. I mean, obviously, some of our fans are going to have head loss regardless of opponent. FC. Yeah, exactly. Certain channels, you know, they breed off head loss. So, but yeah, I think for me it was less head loss, more sadness, if you can say that about football, because it was almost like, look what we've become in a way, and look, you know, it's so early in the season. It's February 26th, and we're already accepting that the Premier League title race is over on a night where really, you know, we should have been checking the Liverpool score, really. Like we should have. And I think we were in this situation where there was a midweek round of fixtures a couple of months ago, and we were checking it and we were saying, oh, there's a boost there. They've, you know, Liverpool were being pegged back. I think they were playing Newcastle. I can't remember.
Yeah, Newcastle away. It was
Newcastle. Yeah, it was in Newcastle. Newcastle again, and we were checking it. Now it was pretty sad to. I didn't even check the Liverpool score. I didn't bother because I was like, it doesn't matter. So it was sad from that perspective to see the football that we could muster because of the squad that we have, the sort of de-evolution, I guess I'll call it, of our style of play, which I'm sure we'll go into later on. And yeah, it was just a bit of a sad occasion rather than angry. I think you're right. The anger was probably more for the West Ham game.
Do you know what I find like really telling? So for me, don't get me wrong, right? After Saturday, that was it. Done and dusted. Okay, there wasn't any chance. But there was a tiny part of me, because of the optimist that I am when it comes to football, that went up to Nottingham Forest and thought, I tell you what, if we could somehow win and Newcastle could spring a bit of a surprise. I'm not saying it's back on because we're running out of games, right? But it could see us resolve the damage that we did at the weekend and put us in exactly the same position as we were previously. Okay, it's a weaker position because it'd be one game less. Liverpool have already been to City, and Liverpool would have got Newcastle out of the way as well. But there was a tiny little part of me, the optimist in me was like, you know, if we can go and win tonight, you never know. And then I get to the City ground, and I knew it was going to be a shit night because my journey there was shit. And when I got into the stadium and I sat down, I needed to be on air at 6:12 p.m. And I literally dialed on at 6:11. The team news dropped a few minutes after that. I had no time to kind of get settled, sort myself out, find the team news, whatever. So it was all a bit slapdash for me. And I knew at that point it was going to go bad. And then I saw the Newcastle team news.
Yeah.
Alexander Isak. Like, if ever there was a sign from the gods that Liverpool are destined to win the Premier League title, this was it. They played City at the weekend with no Haaland, and they played Newcastle with no Alexander Isak. It just feels like it's written in its procession now.
Yeah, it felt a bit like, do you remember that game, the Aston Villa game against Man City, where Aston Villa just kind of down tools? You know, Unai Emery was probably like, these idiots screwed me over. I'm gonna screw them back with this team selection against Man City. If it felt, you know, it wasn't the same as that, but it felt a little bit like that. It's like whatever outside chance you had, that little glimmer of hope was just completely gone when you saw that Newcastle basically had no chance against Liverpool. So yeah, sad day.
Let's kick off our sort of breakdown of the game by discussing the team selection. No Miles Lewis-Skelly available. For what it's worth, I think he probably would have started this one. I think the plan going into last weekend was to use Calafiori at the weekend and to bring Lewis-Skelly in for the Forest game. Obviously, he came on in that game against West Ham, got himself sent off, and therefore wasn't available. Jorginho came in for Partey. Was you surprised by that at all?
I was pleasantly surprised because I think he came into the team just a bit earlier than this point last season, and I think he made a real difference because I think, you know, we talk about this physicality versus technical skill debate that we've had all season long about our approach and how that's changed to become, you know, more dominant, more physically dominant, and I think Jorginho is just a real difference maker in that debate. And he is one that will pass the ball forward, and he is one that will be a bit more creative, and he does leave you a little bit lighter as an effect of that in counter attack. But yeah, so yeah, I was surprised actually. But to be honest, you know, these links with Martin Zubimendi that we keep seeing, I kind of see him as a little bit like a Jorginho player. To be honest, like he is sort of that slender build. He's not the most physical, but what he does give you is that progressive passing. And I think if we're looking at the evolution of this team, it's not going to be Jorginho, but I think it will be a Jorginho-like player in that position, or I'm hoping at least to kind of readdress that balance a little bit. So yeah, surprised and not surprised. But it was a good move, I thought, overall, even though, you know, we're talking about I think we had one shot on target throughout the whole game, so obviously it's not working, but I thought comparatively to what Thomas Partey offers us, I thought it was a little bit more progressive.
I don't think Thomas Partey's been bad lately, so I was a little bit surprised at this change. I've got to be honest with you. And I'd spoken quite a bit in the preview show about Forest's strength being on the transition. And when I think of Jorginho, I think firstly of all his qualities, right? Technically very gifted, very intelligent, etc., etc. But he is probably the least transition resistant midfielder that we have in our ranks, just because I don't think he covers ground as well as some of the others. So when I saw him in the team, I was surprised. But then I started to think, as we sort of built up to kick off, that maybe that means a slight adjustment in the shape of our midfield. And I think we saw that in the game. So I thought that Jorginho was always going to have the protection of Rice alongside him, and it became more like a 2 in that midfield. And we looked more like we were in a 4-4-2 shape. Odegaard, I think, was clearly tasked with getting closer to Mikel Merino. And so I thought it was more of a 4-4-2, both out of possession, but also, out of possession. I'm not talking about on the ball. On the ball, you want to give people a little bit more license. You want to see them drifting into different areas. But certainly out of possession, Jorginho had that luxury, I think, of looking to his left and having Declan Rice just 5-10 yards deeper than he probably would be if Thomas Partey was in the team. But I do think, Mike, that caused us some issues as well, because Ricardo Calafiori playing at left back, what does he want to do? He doesn't want to sit at left back, does he? He wants to go drifting.
He was not playing the left back.
yeah, exactly. But when you have Declan Rice dropping 5-10 yards deeper, as I've described, you're shutting off one of the spaces, or you're already occupying one of the spaces that I think Ricardo Calafiori wants to go into. So then you end up having him go wider and higher. And I don't think that necessarily suits him. I think higher suits him, but I think he needs to be higher in more central areas. And I think at times yesterday, he was forced to go on the outside a little bit. And that, for me, doesn't really work. I know you can make the case that in the first half, he was probably our biggest attacking threat. He had that chance, didn't he, where he spun away from Dominguez and got the shot off.
Yeah.
And that come from a slightly wider area. But the point I'm trying to make is that in trying to adjust that midfield to protect Jorginho and give him what he needs, you shut off one of the natural spaces that your inverted fullback wants to go into. I also felt that on the right-hand side, having Odegaard pushed slightly further up meant that him and Ethan Nwaneri got in each other's way at times. I didn't see Nwaneri yesterday go really wide and receive the ball and want to come in. I kept seeing him go into these half spaces inside. And if Odegaard's playing as a kind of ghost second number 9, that's exactly the area that he wants to occupy. And I don't think that worked either.
Yeah, I think the plan was very much as we spoke about in the last week. Excuse me, in preview for the West Ham game, was to get essentially more bodies around Mikel Merino to help him, and I think Calafiori did that. He did pop up in the inside channel, but you're right, on the outside channel a lot. And also we saw on the other side, Urian Timber going wide and high, and Nwaneri was coming in, and yeah, you are right, he was clashing with Odegaard a little bit. But I think not necessarily a bad idea, because if you're going to keep Declan Rice sort of more reserved, you need that width and you need that help. I did notice Mikel Merino was a lot more of a false 9 than a 9, and I think that was a deliberate ploy, because I think he did struggle against West Ham to do the things that we need from a 9, like the things that Kai Havertz would do, and be a bit of a target man. He's obviously not that kind of player at all. So I think we tried to shift it, and also, like, one thing I can say about this game is that we completely nullified, in the first half at least, Nottingham Forest's counter-attack, and they are a devastating counter-attacking team. And speaking about their lineup, I was really surprised that they didn't go 5 at the back, because they've got a Brazilian defender, I think, called Morato, who's been really good when he's come on. So I was really surprised that they didn't shift it to a back three, given the success of West Ham, given the success of Newcastle.
Did you hear Nuno's explanation for that post-match?
No.
So he was asked that question, and he said, well, Arsenal don't have a striker, so I didn't feel that I needed that extra body. Right. So literally, we're in a situation now where opposition managers are being emboldened by the fact that we don't have a striker, and are saying, I'm going to be more aggressive.
Yeah, but that's interesting, because Graham Potter didn't do that. He actually went for the back three because we didn't have a striker, and because he thought we need to shut down the wider areas. Because basically what that does is, when you play 5, is you really reduce the space in the middle, but out wide as well, because they had defenders coming and doubling, tripling up on one area, which I thought would happen. But yeah, I mean, look, like, it's not the hardest thing in the world for a manager to set up against a team with no striker. Although I will say that Liverpool did a pretty good job of it against Man City without a striker. But just going back to us, I think, yeah, like, the idea was to really utilize the width and let Nwaneri play inside, where I think he wants to play, really. Like, I don't really see him as he's not a touchline winger, is he? He is more of a midfielder, so it's more natural for him to play in those inside areas. But yeah, I mean, the big thing, Harry, for me, just watching it, was, the intensity was okay, as you say. We passed it quicker than we have been doing. The off ball, as we've come to expect, was really good. As I say, I think we really nullified their counter attack. Our counter pressing was so good that they could barely get out of their half. Like, we pinned them in, and I'm not seeing us do that to a good team for a while. It feels like. So that part of it, outstanding. But it was just that final third and that penetration. There was none, because our players on the pitch that we had, they don't want to run in behind. So ultimately, when you got a team sitting as deep as they were, you're not threatening them, because we're not a team that takes long shots or going to score from from that area. Nwaneri's really limited. He's got players doubling up, tripling up. He can't get his shot off because there's too many bodies there. And there's no runs in behind. And when you've got someone like Odegaard, who, you know, his skill really is to find those runners in behind, it wasn't happening. So it's just like Nottingham Forest, even though they were backs against the wall, we had one shot on target. So we can have as much dominance and possession as we want, but if it doesn't result in any sort of danger, apart from our left back having a shot which hit the post, I mean, you're in trouble, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the key point for me that you made there is the lack of runners in behind. We can talk about Mikel Merino dropping into slightly different areas, trying to bring centre halves with him. And I think if you're playing against the back four and you can take one of the centre halves with you, you create opportunities, you create space. But because we don't have those runners beyond him, it's almost being done to zero effect. You can bring the centre back out, but if no one's going to make the run beyond him, then what's the point? And also, you know, we're talking about a back four. I always think the way to open a back four that obviously want to stay really compact and narrow and close to one another and want to reduce the spaces in between is to stretch them as wide as possible. Create bigger distances between your fullbacks and your centre back, between the two centre backs, between the right centre back and the right back. You want to make as much space as you can for your midfield runners to get into. And because of that lack of natural width as well. And when I say lack of natural width, I'm not just talking about Nwaneri on the right wanting to play inside. I'm talking about Trossard on the other side, who's a right-footed player that always wants to come in field. And where I think Trossard and Martinelli are quite different is that Martinelli is quite happy to be that touchline guy, even though it's his wrong side, whereas Trossard isn't. Then you look at the fullbacks and you've got essentially two centre-backs starting the game at fullback. So you've got Calafiori, who does like to get forward, but as we've already discussed, likes to do it in more central areas in the half spaces. And on the right-hand side, you've got Jurien Timber, who for me is giving it 100%. Like, I can't fault his effort for a second, but he's just not that kind of fullback. He is a centre-back. And this is where the issue of building your defence around centre-back profiles and utilising them as fullbacks, this is the downside to it. When you need to flick the switch and change it and have them bombing on the outside, it doesn't come naturally to them. And so there was a lack of width, and it allowed Nottingham Forest, I think, to stay compact. We mentioned one shot on target, which obviously isn't anywhere near good enough. We had 13 attempts at goal. 9 of them were blocked, which shows you again that we couldn't get in behind. Everything that we were doing, everything that we were trying to sort of conjure up was from the edge of the box with Nottingham Forest sitting in front of us. And that kind of says a lot about our inability, I think, to go around the outside, to get in behind. And if a side like Forest, who, you know, will play on the transition and so aren't going to play with a high line from the start of any move or any phase, if that's what they're going to do, you need to have that bit more guile. You need to have that bit more creativity. And it's as simple as saying we lack quality in that area. Mikel Arteta said it after the game. I think he was right to talk about the rest of the performance because I thought it was better. Still not good enough in a lot of ways, but better. Better than it was against West Ham. But you've just, I don't know, we've got nothing in attack right now. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting increasingly frustrated with hearing people go, oh, it's Mikel Arteta's fault. Can you hold him partly culpable? Yeah, because as I've described it before, I think this is a collective failure. And I think you can look at every single person involved and say, you've played your part somewhere along the line here. But this guy, Mike, he sat in press conferences throughout the month of January saying, we're short. We need someone. We're short. The club then don't get anyone. He has never made any secret about the fact that, you know, that was a disappointment to him. And now we're looking at him and thinking, well, you've got to come up with the solution. Had he sat there and said, I've got everything I need, don't worry, and then he's failed to find the solution, I'd be on his back. But I'm not at this stage. I actually feel for him a bit.
Look, January was a collective failure, as you say, but I do worry about the sort of direction that he took us in at the beginning of the season. Because, like, can we sit here and say that we were amazing before the injuries? No, we weren't. So for me, we've got to accept that January was a failure. That didn't happen, and I think we have done that. But then we need to look a bit further back and say, from the summer, maybe even the season before. And look, I understand why he's done this. and I was listening to Arsenal Vision, and they did quite a good analysis of it, and they were saying that basically Arteta in those games against City when they were battering us and they were out dominating us essentially. They feel, or Clive was saying that essentially Arteta looked to build his team more physicality so they could, beat Man City and those kind of teams, so we could really compete against those teams. But I think the failing really was that, that teams had worked us out by then, and the likes of Newcastle, like we said it so many times, this is the blueprint to beat us. What you do, you stifle our wingers and you basically stop our attack, because we don't progress the ball well centrally. And I think that was where the failure was, is that we tried to go dominant, we tried to go strong, instead of thinking, okay, well, how can we give ourselves other options of how to get through teams? Yeah. And I look at things like the really worrying things is that, yeah, we press really high, Harry, but when we turn the ball over, it doesn't lead to chances. And that's risk averse, because like ultimately Liverpool's greatest strength is that they press really high, and then when they win the ball back, they go like the clappers and they go straight towards goal and they try and get a shot off. Doesn't always work, but it's not that winning the ball back and then stopping, being really slow, trying to maintain control and not lose the ball. It's that attack sort of mentality, and I don't think we have that. So I think there's a failure there in terms of what he thought could really get us over the line in terms of those few extra points to win us the league. And when I look at last season, for me, what lost us the league was the results against Fulham, the drop points there, and then the result against West Ham at home, the 2-0 defeat. And that was a lack of cutting edge. So I just wonder whether Arteta has kind of read it wrong, and he's kind of said, okay, I'm going to tackle it this way and be more dominant, more physical, when really we needed to go the completely other way and say, okay, we need more technical players and we need to be a bit more adventurous in our attack, which we've not done. So I think, yes, January was an issue, but I think there's a wider thing that's kind of concerning me. Whether he, looks to change that in the summer, I guess we'll find out. But it does worry me a bit, to be honest.
I think there's a lot of validity to that point about sort of us prioritizing physicality over technical ability. We talked about it before. I think it's absolutely right to point back to that. And it's absolutely right, I think, if you're trying to identify maybe Mikel Arteta's role in this situation, that would be it, right? We prioritize those types of players. And I think we overlook the fact that you need a little bit of guile at times, and you need a little bit more of that sort of creative off-the-cuff type spark. And we're certainly missing that. I think in this situation, though, this is an extreme situation in terms of the players that we've got missing. And because I heard our manager come out and say, no, we need something. Like, make no bones about it. We need something. I am willing to not give him a free pass, because I think what you've just described has in some way contributed to where we are today, for sure. Because if we had more than one Martin Odegaard type player, for instance, and Martin Odegaard's form went off a cliff and you got someone else that can come in and do that, it's less of an issue. If you have another sort of creator from wide, like Bukayo Saka is, you only have to look at his assist numbers and he drops off in form, but someone else is there to pick up that mantle, then I think you're in a much healthier position than you are today. And if in that instance you still lose those players due to injury and then you're struggling, you bemoan that fact and you're frustrated by that fact, but you don't start to question the squad building. We are here now questioning the squad building because when we've lost certain individuals, we've got nothing like them to replace them. And that for me is a big, big problem. Martin Odegaard again last night, like frustrating because there's a lot of sort of receiving the ball in good areas. There's a lot of spinning around in circles. There's a lot of sort of trying to up the tempo, but I'm not seeing that much output. What I will say in his defense is that if there's no runners in behind, what are you expecting him to pick out? Like, what are you expecting him to do? And that's where I've got a little bit of sympathy for him. But yeah, I mean, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you can really sense the frustration in Mikel Arteta's tone at the moment. His post-match interview yesterday was a little bit spiky, wasn't it? He's sort of like, I don't want to discuss this again. Basically, I don't want to talk about the fact that I don't have a striker again. I'm sick of it, is basically what he wanted to say. And does that show you that there's maybe some frustration on Arteta's part as well? I mean, we're sitting here moaning about it and complaining about it, as we will as fans, but that to me indicates that maybe there's a bit of internal frustration as well. And I just wonder if there's that feeling within the camp right now, because you've seen Rice and Gabriel having a little bit of a heated discussion, shall we say, as they were walking off the pitch at the end of the game. You've got Arteta being spiky in interviews. I mean, he can tend to get that way when we don't get the result that we want, but it feels particularly spiky at the moment. Is there a feeling that maybe everything that's gone on over the last couple of months has caused some frustration within the group, the playing group?
Yeah, possibly. But I think, Harry, like looking longer term, I think we're not at the beginning stages of this project, and like I've kept saying this season, it's all been building towards us winning the title, winning a major trophy, and we're in year 6, and we're no closer to it really, because we've gone closer in previous seasons. So I think that must be playing into it as well, like that pressure. And maybe that's outside pressure, maybe they don't feel that inside the club, but that pressure is definitely building, because at what point do you say, okay, well, are we ever going to get there? What will it take to get there? We've taken steps to try and push us over the line, but it's not quite worked. So what do we do next? And it's like that conversation that I think is really going to be coming, and maybe that sort of pressure is getting to Arteta a little bit. Maybe he's feeling that the media are kind of building towards that, because I know, like, what the media like to do is that if you don't make it, if you drop off your bottle jobs, it's a failure, blah blah blah. It does look past the sort of wider context that we always talk about of what he inherited versus where we are now, and he's turned us into a serious team. And yeah, maybe that is forgotten in that sort of line of thinking. But I think, like, I'd be interested to know from you as well. Just say, like, hypothetically, next season we're in the same position. Like, are you starting to ask questions about whether Arteta is the right person to get us over the line? There's no doubt. And look, I'm not questioning the guy at all. I love him. I think he's done an amazing job to get us to this point where we are now. But if we can't get over the line, do you just accept that, okay, Man City have been really dominant, Slot's coming in and done an incredible job, they've got lucky with injuries, Mo Salah's had an amazing season. Can you explain it away with that and say, it's not quite worked out? Or do you say, okay, maybe it's time to find someone who can get us over the line? I'm not saying that this is what I think, but I'm just trying to envisage a future further down the line where we might be having this conversation.
For me, it depends on what happens in between. And this is why I get really frustrated when, and I'm not saying you're doing this, to be clear, I'm not saying that you're doing this, but this is where I get frustrated when people look at stuff in such a binary way. Like, if Arsenal don't win the Premier League, it's because Mikel Arteta can't win the Premier League. Well, hold on a minute. There's a lot of context behind that. There's reasons for that. So if, for instance, we go into the summer and we have another disappointing transfer window, it will be the third on the bounce. If that's the case, and then we find ourselves come February, March next year, again, looking at the Premier League title, looking at our chances of winning it and saying it's probably quite unlikely and it's not going to happen, then I'm not going to look first at Mikel Arteta, because Mikel Arteta has shown me that when you back him and when you support him, he can give you progress. Okay, the first season, wins the FA Cup. It wasn't really his squad. I thought he gave us something tactically that we were missing, which is what enabled us to go on and win that FA Cup. But then we had a couple of seasons where it was disappointing. I know we finished 8th in the first one. He only had half the season. The second season, after winning the FA Cup, I thought we'd push on. We didn't. We finished 8th. Year after that, we got to 5th, just about missed out on the Champions League. And then it was second. And I would hope that we're going to manage to finish second again this year. If we then go into the summer and we have a disappointing window, we don't go and get big name players. And the reason I'm not normally that guy that says only the big names will do. I'm normally, first and foremost, will they fit in the squad? Is it a good option? Does it work for us? Let's get it. I don't normally obsess over names. But you can't keep saying we're keeping our powder dry because we haven't found the right person. and then avoid making big signings. You have added pressure to yourselves as a football club now to go out in the summer and spend big and bring in players that people will view as priority options, because you keep beating that drum. You don't put that message out, nobody's going to hold you accountable to it. But if that's the message, if that's the response to questions around why Arsenal haven't gone out and done the business that we all felt that they needed to do in January, and you can take this back to last summer, then you are setting yourself up for this situation. And so if, again, the window is underwhelming, I'm not looking at Arteta first. Will I assess what I think his role was in that success or failure? Yeah, of course. But he won't be my first port of call when I'm sort of sitting behind a microphone and having a bit of a moan. He won't be the first one that comes under scrutiny for me, because I think we've seen countless examples of where managers have hit a ceiling in terms of what they can achieve at a football club, and we're very quick to go, oh well, it's the manager, he can't get him over the line. But we often overlook the role and the part that the club plays in that. And a great example of that, I think, is Pochettino at Tottenham. Pochettino got Tottenham to a place where they were consistently in the top four. He took them to a Champions League final, and he did all of that with not minimal backing, but certainly not enough backing. There needed to be some reward for Pochettino for getting Tottenham into the Champions League consistently. That needed to be repaid in terms of investment in the team. And if he had that investment, I'm not saying that he would have gone on and won loads of major trophies, but he might have ended his Tottenham tenure with a piece of silverware. I didn't look at Maurizio Pochettino and say, you're the problem at Spurs. I looked at Daniel Levy and I looked at above him. And so the point I'm trying to make is that you can be a good manager and you can have a ceiling, but that ceiling could be put there by your football club and not necessarily you. And that's kind of where I'm a little bit worried about the bigger picture at Arsenal. The summer's going to be massive. If they go out and get those targets that we've referenced over the course of the last few months, then I think a lot of us will sit down and go, okay, don't agree with you leaving us as short as you did in January. It ultimately cost us our season, I would say. But if it was part of the bigger plan and now we're much better equipped to go again next season, I'll stomach it. What I won't stomach is another summer where we're underwhelmed. Given that we've clearly left him short, and he's going to be the scapegoat, isn't he? Unfortunately,
yeah. And given how close it is, and look, just to say, like, I'm asking you that question because it is something that genuinely has popped into my head recently. But my own opinion is that you're right. Like, different isn't always better, and better the devil, and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that he has earned the right to take this project as far as he wants it to take within reason. So I would say, yeah, okay, we don't win a major trophy this year. Maybe even we don't win one next year. Possibly the year after. Like, you're looking at it saying, I don't know, maybe
you can't say that, Mike. They're coming for you, Mike. You can't say that. They're coming for you in the comments.
What they want him gone out? And I don't know. Like, I don't. The general feeling that I see, because I literally deleted Twitter last night because I didn't want to see all of that sort of overreaction stuff. And look, I'm not saying that he just gets unlimited time, but for me, like, personally, he's earned that right. What I will say as a kind of counterpoint to that, and like, what other managers would have had 7-8 years in a job and only won one FA Cup? Like, that does not happen. Like, that does not happen in the Premier League. Pep Guardiola's been there a long time. Jurgen Klopp was there a long time. I'm not going back to the Sir Alex Ferguson era. At a top club, you do not get that kind of time without winning. So that is the context that we would need to apply to that situation and say, okay, what is different about this, and what has happened? What has been the transfers, etc., that would allow you to say, okay, he can have another year. He can have another year. We're close. Blah blah blah. For me, the most important thing now is what our football looks like next season, what transfers we make, because the Champions League, for me, this might be negative to say, but it's a write-off. Like, we're not winning that without a striker and without probably Bukayo Saka. Like, it's just not going to happen. So that, for me, is already written off in my mind. That might be negative, whatever, I don't care. But for me, it's how we play, because, and I want to ask you about this, actually. Like, this season has not been fun because we've not played good football. And for me, if you're going to have the pressure and the intensity of a title race, you need to at least like have some really big, like enjoyable games where you think we absolutely played them off the park there. You know, we battered them, whether it's against rivals, whether it's against smaller clubs. We've not seen that this season. So for me, that enjoyment factor has to come back as well. And I think that comes into it as well, because, you know, not play great football. It's been, you know, marginal gains really, like with the set pieces and, you know, a more dominant style of football, blah, blah, blah. We've spoken about hundreds of times. But for me, there needs to be an enjoyment as well from game to game, as well as the prizes.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the reasons I've been so on board with the whole Mikel Arteta project is I felt like, to a degree, I've got my club back. Like I've really enjoyed the atmospheres that we've generated under him, partly because of the way he works so hard in terms of getting the crowd on side and all of that stuff. I've enjoyed some of the football. I've enjoyed some of the results. Of course, the fact that we're unbeaten against the traditional big six for as long as we are, we couldn't have even dreamed of that at the end of the Wenger tenure and during Unai Emery's time at the football club, right? So there's been a lot of enjoyment along the way, but it feels like we've hit that barrier now where the enjoyment is no longer there. Beyond this barrier, there's no more enjoyment. And I think the reason there's no more enjoyment is because the expectations kicked in. Took us a bit of time to get to this point where we're now expecting, but because we are expecting, anything less than achieving whatever that expectation is always going to be seen as a failure, is always going to be seen as a negative. So it's a mindset thing more than anything. And I get it. It's the natural progression. And when you progress in something, your expectations get higher. And if you don't meet those expectations and you feel like the progress is being stunted, you're going to be downbeat. You're going to be frustrated. All of that makes perfect sense to me. But I just look at the situation right now, and I think we've gone as far as we can go without fixing our attack. Because if you think about it, we've spent very little, relatively speaking, in comparison to other areas of our team.
Yeah.
The defense has had a lot of money spent on it, and we've got one of the meanest defenses in football. So that's been done correctly and right. You look at our midfield. Do I think we've got the best midfield in football? No, but I think we've got a midfield that has a lot of good elements, good components, and I think it's about tweaking the balance for certain games and certain game plans. And I think we've got pretty much a bit of everything. We've got Rice and Partey who can play as sixes. Jorginho can play as a six, but as a very different type of six. We've got pairings that we can use as a two, like Rice and Jorginho, which we've been discussing. We've got Odegaard. Nwaneri's come to the fore. I would imagine that Mars Lewis-Skelly might be in the conversation for that midfield next season as well. I think we're missing one component. I think we're missing another creator. So I think that's something we need to work on. But then you look at the attack and, you know, okay, Kai Havertz, we spent a fair bit of money on, but we didn't really buy him with the idea of him playing at centre forward. That kind of just happened. It's worked quite well, but it just happened. Saka was already there. Martinelli was already there. We spent a little bit of money on Leandro Trossard. Raheem Sterling was a free loan. You know, so that is clearly the area where there's been the least investment. And I think that is now showing. And so because of that, I'm willing to give them one more chance to kind of get that right. This has to be the summer where we go big in that area of the pitch, because that is what's going to get you over the line. That's what's going to win you football matches. The foundation is there. The base is there. But the rest of it, that shine on top, is missing. And we need that. And my worry now, Mike, is that if we lose Partey and Jorginho in the summer, we're going to have to replace in midfield. So then you go from maybe needing one midfielder to two. And then all of a sudden you have to allocate more resource to the midfield. And given that, in my opinion, Mikel Arteta is a manager that likes to build from the back, he might prioritize that, which leaves us in a position where we underinvest again in the attack. So this is where KSE need to step in as an ownership of the football club and say, look, what do you need? Okay, we have our limits, and you know, it's not a sort of bottomless pit of cash, of course, but we need to maximize the way that we support you, because we've come this far. I always use this analogy on the pod. If you built a house and you've gone over budget and you've got as far as the roof, only the roof is left, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, oh, I've gone over budget, I'm not going to spend any more money? And you're going to let the rain come in and the elements come in and you're going to kill the house and ruin it? Or you're going to find a way to finance the roof, to finish it off? That's where we're at. We're at that stage of the project where we need to finish it off. It needs the gloss on top. And if you don't want to do that, what the hell was the point in spending all the money you did in the years prior? Unless your only ambition is to be in the Champions League because of the revenues that generates. And that's where we're going to learn a lot about the ambition of the football club in general, I think, over the course of the next few months.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with it with a lot of that. What I will say is when you were talking there, I see the left number 8 position as a real sort of bone of contention, really, because we've been speaking about it for so long. You know, is it Declan Rice? Is it Kai Havertz? Is it Mikel Merino? And I think like it's quite key because obviously you have Martin Odegaard on the right hand side, so naturally Arteta might think I want something, you know, a bit more dominant here. Whereas I think what we really need to change our style of play is get someone who is more technically proficient there. And I think like I've enjoyed watching the Pep Guardiola teams down the years because what he's always done is when he has played that system, is played someone more creative. There, David Silva, Andres Iniesta at Barcelona, and I think you kind of need that. So I don't know what we do in that position. And the other thing is that I wonder, like, the lack of spending in attack. Yes, you can maybe say that in 1 or 2 seasons, that is, you know, a market opportunity that wasn't there. The striker that we wanted wasn't available for a certain price, blah, blah, blah. But we're talking about a long period of time. We're talking about, you know, six years and, you know, I don't know, 12-ish transfer windows for that sort of marquee attacking signing not to have happened. Like, that does worry me a little bit because, like, and I don't necessarily share this opinion because I think it is more nuanced than this, but like, it does worry me in terms of what does that say about Arteta's preference for, you know, where he wants his big money players. Because if we look at it, the big money players have been Declan Rice, Kai Havertz was brought in to play in midfield. Ben White, not huge money, but, you know, that sort of fee. They've all been on defenders and midfielders, really. So that does concern me, and I worry, I guess, whether, like, do you see us spending 70, 80 million that it would take to get like that top level 9 that we want? Because personally, I can't, like, firstly because I don't really see them available. I don't know who we could get that's like ready to come in the prime of their career, like a 25 goal guarantee striker. I don't think that exists. So I think probably what we revert to is going to that level below of a younger profile, like a Benjamin Sesko, like a Ekatike, someone like that. And while I wouldn't be unhappy with that, it's not maybe the signing that a lot of people will want.
Yeah, it's not the signing that guarantees anything, is it? It's a bit of a gamble to a degree because you're bringing in someone with a view to developing them rather than them being the finished article. And I think having progressed the way we have over the last few years, people are right to probably think, actually, the finished article is what we're after here and what we need. I agree with you on the left 8 thing, and that is kind of, I'm not talking about that position specifically necessarily, but when I alluded to the fact that I think we're going to end up having to fix other areas again as well, because that cycle has come around, that I worry that that's going to take away from what we can do in the attack. And ultimately, strikers cost the most money. Strikers bring you the most valuable commodity in football. Therefore, they're going to have bigger price tags. And I don't think for me, it's Mikel Arteta not wanting to spend in those positions. I think that there's a limit with regards to what Arsenal would spend on one player. I think at least what they're comfortable with spending on one player. I think Declan Rice was the one exception in that they were so convinced and so adamant that he would really elevate the level of the team that they were willing to go that extra mile. But when you look at your Seskos and maybe your Gyökeres, people that have been talked about, and you're talking 70, 80 million for them, I can see why a football club would go, I'm not sure about that. You know, because ultimately you'll only be willing to pay for something what you think it's worth. Maybe you go a little bit over the top because you think that they're going to bring that value to your side. But I kind of get that reluctance a little bit, but it's very, very clear now that that's what's missing. Like Mikel Arteta said in his press conference last night, it's clear we're missing that bit up top. Like, I don't know how clearer he can make it that he wants a striker. Yeah. And again, I'll circle back to the point of this is why I'm not going after him. This is why I'm not sitting here going, you decided this, you decided that, because I genuinely believe that he wanted a striker. I genuinely believe that he knew there was a need. I don't know, I'm speculating, but I don't know if there's been any issues behind the scenes with that, because the way Mikel Arteta is taking these questions on in the press is very different to how he would have done 6 months ago.
Yeah.
In the past, he'd have said, look, I'm focused on what I have, blah, blah, blah. Now it's very much at every opportunity that's presented to him. Yeah, we're short. We need this. We haven't got it. And that shift in his demeanor, I think, says that there might be some disagreements between, various parties at the football club with regards to kind of how we move forward. I know we've turned this into a kind of more general chat because, listen, the game was pretty uneventful. I think you can summarize it in 30 seconds. Arsenal played better than they did against West Ham and were good in 2/3 of the pitch, but couldn't make it happen in the final third. Just to wrap up, Mike, I had some conversations on WhatsApp last night on my way home from the game, and there seemed to be a general consensus among a few people that I was speaking to that Arteta should start thinking outside of the box, should come up with another formation, should come up with another system that will enable us in our time of need with no forwards to extract more from this team. I was racking my brain on the 2.5 hour drive back from Nottingham last night, and I can't think of a single different formation or system that A, we have time to adapt to, and B, that would get more out of the group that we have. Because I think the way we're profiled limits us.
Well, yeah, and like that's the key point, isn't it? Like maybe we could come up with something bizarre, like me playing Calafiori at left wing in one of the mad lineups that we did a few weeks ago. Maybe we could, but I think like the thing is about Arteta is that, and maybe to its detriment, but the players are almost programmed to play in this style of play. They know that per position you do this, and you move into this area, and you track back in this area, and you shoot or don't shoot in this area. Like it is literally, the point of it is like the training is so intense because you're meant to know exactly what to do when you get to that position or on the pitch. And yes, you could say maybe that has led to us being a bit less creative in attack because it is more functional. But that just shows you that you can't change it, because it just is what it is. Like you can't suddenly go in one day and say, guys, forget everything I've taught you over the last 5 years, however long the players have been there. Try this. Do you know what I mean? Like it can't. I don't really think that can happen, especially not at this stage of the season, and especially when essentially the Premier League is gone. And I think that weirdly the style of play that we have, which is more defensive styles, probably suits knockout football a bit more. Like, I know I'm quite downbeat about our chances, but it probably does. So I think it would be pointless really to go and say, guys, forget it all. We're going to go all out attack, start again, essentially, because it would just send the wrong message. Maybe in the Premier League, not now, but in the last 10 games, we can experiment a bit more. But the problem is, Harry, like I was looking at the bench, there's nothing on the bench. Like there's no player on the bench that would improve the team. Yes, they can offer something, but mate, we're turning to Kieran Tierney and Zinchenko, who we know as clear as day aren't part of our plans long term. That is the situation we're in. So I don't really know what you could do to change that.
The Zinchenko thing is the most telling of them all, because for a long time, I think a lot of us have maybe floated the idea of him being used as a midfielder, because we know he's got that technical quality and maybe defensively he's lacking a little bit, and therefore you don't want to leave him 1v1 against wingers over and over again. We've seen that cost us in the past. But Mikel Arteta seemed to, up until this point, have zero interest in trying that whatsoever. And all of a sudden, in the last 2 games, bang, Zinchenko comes on as a midfielder. Which says to me, and I'll just wrap up on this point, that it's not just about the striker. We talk so much about the striker, but the fact that we had 1 shot on target tells you there's a creativity problem. And the creativity thing, it's not just an issue in that front 3. It goes further back than that. And Arteta has clearly identified that and feels like when he's bringing on Zinchenko ahead of Sterling, I'm sitting here saying, well, what message does that send to Raheem Sterling? And that, I think, is valid and true. But it does show you, doesn't it, that he believes that creativity problem, it comes from deeper in the side. And so you could get a striker, but if they don't get the service, what the hell are they going to deliver you? And so it comes back to that point where we were talking about the midfield a bit earlier on. We need another creator, because the one creative force we have in our midfield is horribly out of form at the moment in Martin Odegaard. And that's the reality.
Yeah, and look, and he still kind of doesn't look fit either. Like, you know, it's hard to speculate on players' fitness and whatnot. But since he's come back from the ankle injury, he just doesn't look the same player. Like, he showed it in flashes. But I'm sorry, but like Martin Odegaard, what you get out of him, guaranteed every game when he's fit, is like one of the best pressing midfielders in the league, if not Europe. And we're not even seeing that. So that to me tells me that there's something not quite right. And it's just indicative of where we are, because, you know, whenever would Martin Odegaard come off in the 85th minute when we need a goal?
You need a goal, yeah.
Away from home with the squad we have, like for the substitutions that were made, it just wouldn't happen. So that tells me that number one maybe isn't fit, but number two, like we've just like there's too much over reliance on these players, and this is a situation partly luck, partly squad building, as we've spoken about. But it's just a slog at the moment. It really is, because we don't have any options, and I think it's just going to unfortunately continue like this until we start getting some of these players back.
Yep, strap in, because I think we've got a few more weeks of this to come for sure. Michael, thank you very much for joining me to reflect on another disappointing performance result. I don't know where to go. It was more of a performance or result thing. As I said right at the top, a draw away at third place Forest isn't the end of the world, but given the context and given that the same issues appear to rear their ugly head, it is a tough one to take. Thank you so much for joining me, mate, and I will speak to you very, very soon. Just quickly let people know where they can follow you and what you're up to.
Yeah, Mike Staver on Blue Sky, and check out the Athletic podcast as well, which I work on every day.
Brilliant stuff. Make sure you head over there and do exactly that. Make sure you leave a like on here. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're listening to us on audio, please do leave us a review. Thank you all very, very much for your continued support, and we'll see you all on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves.